Creative Assembly announced Medieval 3 Total War on Thursday alongside a new game engine called Warcore and confirmed their next fantasy title gets revealed at the Game Awards this week. The Medieval 3 announcement represents the earliest they've ever revealed a project, putting the game somewhere between 3 and 5 years from release, possibly longer. The showcase itself has problems in execution that I'll address, but the core announcement deserves attention because the Warcore engine update has more long-term significance for the franchise than Medieval 3 itself. The showcase ran for an hour and delivered about a quarter of the End Times DLC for Warhammer 3, some concept art and developer interviews for Medieval 3, technical details about Warcore, and an announcement that another announcement happens at the Game Awards. If you planned your day around this thinking you'd have a big fantasy reveal, I understand the frustration. I feel it. The original plan clearly had that reveal at the end of the show based on how the host framed it, but someone made a business decision to move the content to the Game Awards for a larger audience. That does make sense from a business perspective because the Game Awards reaches potential customers they've never touched, but if you promise something then change the plan, people have the right to feel annoyed. The Total War community has dealt with several significant disappointments over the last few years, and this showcase needed to deliver more substance to rebuild trust. They needed to stand on business, and I don't think they did. The Medieval 3 reveal amounted to a teaser trailer, some concept art, and developers talking about the vision for a game that has just entered early pre-production. The Rome 2 reveal years ago had more punch. Bethesda did essentially the same thing with Elder Scrolls 6 by acknowledging the project exists without showing anything substantive. That satisfies a certain demand from the community for confirmation, but at this stage the game barely exists beyond concepts and planning documents. Pavel Wojcik serves as game director, and that should give people confidence because he worked on Medieval 2 back in 2005, and he's been at Creative Assembly through most of their historical releases, including Three Kingdoms. He knows what he's doing, he's passionate about history, and the team clearly has the right expertise. But expertise and passion don't mean much when you have zero control over what happens over the next 4 years of development. If they're further along than they claim, they should have shown more. If they're really in early pre-production as they stated, then this announcement served as a promise rather than a reveal. The vision for Medieval 3 focuses on rewriting history rather than just painting the map red, which echoes how Paradox designs their grand strategy games. Creative Assembly wants more ways for players to influence the world beyond pure conquest, more tools for building kingdoms through diplomacy, economy, culture, and other systems that reflect how medieval power worked. They emphasise historical authenticity as a core pillar, wanting the game to inspire people to learn real history by playing, which means looking at why medieval systems worked the way they did and translating that into gameplay. Recruitment serves as their example. They want raising an army to feel like calling your banners and mustering forces based on oaths of fealty, moving away from the click and spawn system that doesn't reflect medieval military organisation. Three Kingdoms showed they can execute a complex campaign system, so this direction makes sense and builds on what they learned from that game. The setting aims for the high to late medieval period, roughly the 12th to the 15th century like Medieval 2, covering multiple centuries from the era of knights and crusades through to the emergence of gunpowder and early nation states. They mentioned the Mamluks, Mongols, Ottomans, France, Castile, the Holy Roman Empire, Italian city-states, the Byzantines, and the Reconquista, which suggests the traditional Medieval 2 geographic scope from England to Mesopotamia. No confirmation on whether they might expand them above the time like they did with Warhammer 3, but that would make sense as a long-term content strategy. The concept art showed trade caravans, buildings outside the main settlement that might be attackable, possible player place fortifications, and various regional architecture styles. Everything shown was concept art though, none of that confirms these features exist in the actual game yet. They plan quarterly blog updates to take the community through development, which follows the Paradox model of transparent development diaries. That approach can work well if they handle it correctly, giving players input on direction early enough that feedback can influence decisions. The risk comes if they show things that change or get cut later because game development means iteration and sometimes features don't work as planned. They acknowledge this risk and said they expect some mistakes along the way, which at least shows realistic expectations about the process. The Warcore engine announcement matters more than Medieval 3 for the franchise future because it provides the foundation for every Total War game moving forward. The current engine dates back to 2009 with updates branched across multiple projects, which created significant technical debt that limited what they could do and slowed development. Anyone who has played Total War games knows the performance issues and pathfinding problems, the limitations on destruction and environmental interaction. Warcore addresses these foundational problems with a complete overhaul of core systems. The rendering system got upgraded to DirectX 12 with new lighting techniques, dynamic shadowing, better ambient occlusion for self-shadowing on models, higher fidelity meshes and textures without sacrificing performance, and improved VFX rendering on new ribbon technology for projectiles. These changes mean battles will look significantly better across both historical and fantasy titles moving forward. They showed some time of day examples and high fidelity shots that look impressive, though obviously everything shown was carefully selected showcase material. The Havoc physics system integration for destruction has gameplay implications beyond just visual improvements. Buildings will deconstruct dynamically through phases as they take damage, and this destruction affects pathfinding, cover, and tactical options on the battlefield. The battle AI got updated to understand and use these systems, responding to destruction and using reinforcements more effectively. Whether the AI improvements deliver what they promised remains to be seen, because Creative Assembly has announced AI improvements many times before, but coupling it with a new engine architecture suggests this might have more substance than previous claims. The campaign side got rewritten to be modular, which helps developers create more bespoke faction mechanics without running into engine limitations. The campaign AI can now model future game states to make better strategic decisions instead of only reacting to the current turn. The animation system moved to a graph-based node system allowing more variety and better movement, specifically mentioning strafing and improved vehicle movement. That emphasis on strafing and vehicles strongly suggests Warhammer 40k as a future project, especially when combined with the updated dismemberment system and the focus on console capability. Warcore supports Xbox and PlayStation, which opens possibilities for Total War on console without compromising the depth and complexity that defines the franchise on PC. They emphasise that PC remains the priority, and they're not dumbing down the grand strategy experience, but console capability means they can explore different types of Total War projects that might work better on those platforms. The Sophia office could handle smaller scale Total War experiences designed for console, while the main studio focuses on the big PC strategy games. Creative Assembly has involvement with Halo Wars 2, so they have experience with strategy games on console even if it's not their core expertise. The engine improvements also mean better tools for developers, more efficient workflows, and easier onboarding for new team members. These aren't exciting things to discuss in a showcase, but they matter tremendously for long-term franchise health. The technical debt kills studios when it gets out of control, and Warcore represents the investment needed to keep Total War viable for another decade or more. This foundation means future games can iterate faster, deliver more ambitious features, and avoid the performance problems that plagued recent releases. The End Times DLC for Warhammer 3 arrives summer 2026 with Nagash and 3 other legendary lords from the End Times, plus 1 free legendary lord for everyone. They confirmed the pack includes content for at least 4 separate factions, making this a full End Times experience beyond just Nagash and the Undead. The showcase only showed Nagash, but they plan to reveal other lords individually over time, which benefits content creators by spreading reveals out from multiple videos. End Time Scenarios introduces phases with build-up, actions and culmination battles that can succeed or fail with lasting consequences. Cataclysmic events like volcanic eruptions, earthquakes creating massive fissures, and warpstone meteor impacts permanently alter the campaign map, changing terrain and potentially rendering regions uninhabitable. The Realm of Chaos battlefields for Warhammer 3 come to Immortal Empires, which matters because those represent some of the best battlefield maps Creative Assembly has ever made. Archaon gets a visual update and new narrative features to properly frame the End Times as his event. The biggest news for Warhammer 3 might be that Immortal Empires now requires ownership of only one game from the trilogy instead of all 3. Anyone can buy just the End Times DLC and access Immortal Empires with whatever content they own, which dramatically lowers the entry barrier for new players and makes the combined map the definitive way to experience Total War Warhammer. The Game Awards reveal happens on December the 11th, and everything points towards Warhammer 40k based on the Warcore features they emphasised, the strafing and vehicle movement improvements, and the fact that they hired a game director experienced with that IP. Medieval 3 takes years to arrive, but Creative Assembly has another major project in development that's further along, and 40k makes the most sense given the engine's capabilities they've built. The showcase had the right announcements but poor execution in how they presented everything. Medieval 3 deserved more than concept art and interviews if they wanted people to get excited about a game years away from release. Warcore deserved more emphasis as the foundational improvement that affects everything going forward. The End Times content looks solid and arrives next summer with substance to discuss, but only showing Nagash felt incomplete for an hour-long anniversary showcase. Moving the fantasy reveal to the Game Awards makes business sense but breaks the promise that they made about what this showcase would deliver. The Total War community has dealt with enough disappointment over recent years that the showcase needed to exceed expectations. Instead, it barely met them. The core content announced is good, the direction looks promising, but the execution left people frustrated, and that frustration is understandable even if it's not the end of the world. And now for the headlines. Dawn of War 4 got a big cinematic story trailer this week showing the campaign setup and confirming that Dark Angels will team up with the Blood Ravens on Kronos. Black Library author John French co-wrote the story, which has Kronos dealing with two rival orc bosses fighting for control while Necrons emerge from their tombs and an invasion fleet appears overhead. You'll play as both chapters during the campaign, and the tease that Dark Angels Primarch Lionel Johnson might be playable at some point, which will be significant for 40k games in general because Primarches rarely show up as playable characters. The Adeptus Mechanicus also features in the game based on what they've shown so far. King Art Games took over development from Relic Entertainment with Games Workshop arranging the handoff sometime before Iron Harvest released in 2020. Relic was focused on Age of Empires 4 and Company of Heroes 3 at that point, then went through layoffs under Sega in 2023 before an investor buyout made them independent in 2024, so they had their hands full. King Art proved themselves with Iron Harvest and could be solid stewards for the franchise. Dawn of War 4 releases sometime in 2026 with Deep Silver publishing. Colossal Order released custom asset support for the Cities Skylines 2 editor this week, which might be their last throw of the dice before Paradox moves the franchise to their internal Iceflake studio next year. The editor lets you import custom meshes and textures, then customize buildings and props with extensive decoration options. Everything works in a single scene where you can place and edit multiple assets simultaneously, and there's no hard limit for how many props you can attach to a building, though performance takes a hit if you go overboard. The system supports 3 different colour mask textures per asset with unlimited colour variation combinations, so you can decorate not just buildings but also vehicles and props themselves. Lot sizes go up to 1000 tiles, which lets you create massive building complexes without managing multiple separate assets. Pathfinding uses invisible paths for citizens and vehicles, plus defined areas where people can navigate or perform activities. Once you finish an asset, you can share it on Paradox mods directly from the editor. Colossal Order included tutorials covering the basic functions with tooltips for additional information and technical requirements live on the official wiki. The editor remains in beta for this initial implementation, but asset creation and modding define much of the original Cities Skylines community, so this represents an important step for the sequel, even if the franchise future sits with a different development team. The Nova Roma demo released on Steam this week ahead of the City Builders Early Access launch on January the 22nd. Lion Shield developed it, the studio behind Kingdoms and Castles, with Hooded Horse Publishing. The game puts you in charge of a breakaway Roman faction trying to establish a new empire away from the crumbling core, and the demo lets you experiment with the production chains, supply lines, and aqueduct systems that define city management. The gods play a role through requests and benefits if you keep them satisfied, though ignoring them brings consequences through natural disasters and other problems. Aqueducts work as both infrastructure and vulnerability, since damage to them can flood your crops or disrupt water supply for your population. The old empire might come looking for you eventually, and local barbarians can cause trouble, so defensive planning matters alongside economic development. Nova Roma releases on Steam, GOG and the Microsoft Store, and it joins PC Game Pass on day 1 for subscribers. The demo gives you a chance to test the system before committing to the full purchase when early access starts next month. That's all you need to know this week. Thanks for watching. See you next time.